How's it going, YouTube? Hope everybody's day is going well. In the last video, we talked about ILS approaches, and in today's video, we're going to talk about RNAV approaches. So RNAV in comparison to ILS is relatively easy. It's pretty much just plug and play. Keep in mind, GPS is required, so if you were to try to do it in a plane that is not equipped with GPS, it wouldn't work out so well. So we're going to start south of Georgia, and we're going to fly north towards Savannah. We're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to learn how to set up the PFD. We're going to learn how to set up everything else, like brief ourselves with the approach plate. We're going to learn the difference between loading and activating an approach, and then we're going to go ahead and shoot the approach. So that being said, I'll see you in the air. So we're going to want to set our flight plan and make sure that we have this loaded. If you don't know how to do this, you can check out my video on flight planning, and that will explain the whole thing. You could also, instead of doing a flight plan, fly direct to your destination airport. And then we're going to want to set up our CDI and bearing pointer. So we're going to want our CDI on GPS. So if we come to CDI here and press the soft key, eventually the GPS will come up. So we want this GPS CDI active, and we'll come over to PFD option, and we'll set our bearing pointer. So we'll come to bearing 2 or bearing 1 and click it until we see GPS come up. Lastly, if you haven't already done so, we're going to want to set up the autopilot. So right now I have it on GPS, and you're going to want to make sure it's on GPS. That's the key. If you don't know how to set up any of the rest, there's a autopilot tutorial video on my channel. You can check that out if you'd like. So we've got our PFD set up. We've got our destination airport loaded into the system. Now we want to pan over to our EFB, and I'll change my position so you can see this better. So on the EFB, we're going to come to the search bar here, and we're going to type in KSAV, which is our destination airport, and click on it. Once we have our destination airport in here and we have clicked on it, we'll see this purple box come up. So this purple box, we're going to want to click this chart button here, and then we're going to want to go to approaches, and we're going to want to select the approach that best fits us. In our case, that's going to be the RNAV GPS runway 1. And if you want to narrow this down, if there's a lot of approaches here, you can select the specific runway, and then it'll narrow it down. For us, we're going to do RNAV GPS 1. We're going to come over here to the right side of that and click this button here, and that'll bring us up to our approach plate. So on the approach plate, once we get this set up, we want to verify a couple things. We want to verify that it's the correct destination airport. For us, that's Savannah. We're using the RNAV GPS for runway 1. Then we're going to want to figure out our initial approach fixes. So we'll come over here to this little box, and these are the 3 initial approach fixes that we could use. So essentially, if you could picture the airport being in the center of this diagram, it's saying that if we're in this sector, then we want to use the initial approach fix Zutan. And if we're in this sector, we want to use Turbi and Wusug, so on and so forth. So we're approaching from the south, so we're going to want to use Turbi. We can also see this 2.5 and 30-mile ring. That means that if we're within 30 miles from Turbi, approaching from the south, 2,500 is the altitude that we want to be at. So we're approaching from the south and we want to use Turbi. So we've found out our initial approach fix. Then we can come down here and find our altitudes. So this is the profile view. So we can see here we want to be 2,500 by Turbi. Then we want to descend to 2,000 before Mislu. And then after we get to Mislu, we descend on the approach. So just keep these in the back of your mind. Now for this, for minimums, we'll use Charlie and LPV, or if there's an Alpha or Bravo, you could use those as well. Generally speaking, Alpha is the slowest approach speed, Bravo is the second slowest, so on and so forth. So if you're approaching the airport super slow, you would use Alpha minimums. For us, we're going to use Charlie, LPV, and 240. So 240 is going to be our minimums. So now that we've briefed our approach plate, we'll leave it here, and we're going to want to load it. So we'll come back over to our PFD here, and we'll load the approach. So we'll find procedure, PROC, and we'll click on that, and we're going to be met with this. We're going to want to select the select approach, and we can, if it's not highlighted, you can use the big FMS knob to select it. Then once it's highlighted, press enter, and you should see your destination airport show up here, and then it's going to ask you what approach you'd like to use. For us, we're going to be using the RNAV GPS for runway 1, so we'll scroll down with the big FMS knob and highlight it, press enter, and then it's asking which initial approach fix you want to use. We determined that we're coming from the south, so we're going to want to use the Turby initial approach fix. So we'll use the big knob to highlight it, and then press enter. And you can say no for this. Then we're going to want to set our minimums. So use the big knob to scroll back and forth here, and then we can use the small knob to select Barrow, the big knob to go back and forth to feet, and then scroll through until you reach your minimums, which for us is 240. Once you have that, you come to the decision of do you want to load or activate it. So what is the difference between loading and activating? Well, loading will load the approach into the G1000, but it will only load it. So the GPS, the autopilot, is not going to follow it unless you tell it to. So if I select load here, and we zoom out on the MFD, we can see that Turby is in there and the approach is loaded. However, if I just left this the way it was and we kept flying, the autopilot would not fly the approach. It would only go to the last waypoint on our flight plan, which is our destination. So why would you want to do this? If you're 50 miles out and you want to reduce your workload, you can load the approach, so that way by the time you get to your final fix on your flight plan, all you have to do is hit procedure, scroll down, and enter on activate approach. And then it minimizes your workload when you get to the critical phase of flight over here. So activating the approach will send the plane straight to the initial approach fix, no matter where you are. So if you want to go straight to the initial approach fix, you would select activate. So at this point in the flight, the entire approach is loaded and ready to go. The only thing left to do after this is to monitor the plane and click a couple more buttons. So we'll skip ahead until we reach the initial approach fix, and then we'll shoot the approach. So now that we're coming up on our top of descent, we want to descend to 2,500. So I've used the altitude bug to scroll down to 2,500, and we can use vertical speed and nose down to about 500 feet per minute to get us on down to 2,500. There's also another way that you can do this. Because the approach was loaded into the system, it automatically loads those altitudes that we talked about before. So we can also hit vertical navigation, and then we get to a V path on the autopilot. Now this is basically a system that will guide the plane down and put us at 2,500 by the time we reach our initial approach fix. So now that we're coming up on our initial approach fix and our desired altitude, we're going to start getting ready for the next phase of the approach, which would be the inbound. We can see that our autopilot is leveling off at 2,500. We're going to start tracking our inbound course. Now our next descent is going to be down to 2,000. So we'll set the altitude bug to 2,000, and you can leave this on vertical navigation, VNV, if you want. For me, I like to descend to 2,000 well before the final approach fix. So for this, we'll hit vertical speed, nose down to 500, and descend on down to 2,000. At this point, we're going to want to start getting ready to intercept our glide slope. So we're going to want to come over to our autopilot panel and hit APR, approach mode. So that will activate glide path, and essentially that means that when this magenta diamond reaches our altitude, the airplane will intercept that and start following it down towards the runway. At that point of the approach, we just start getting ready for a landing. Now that we're coming up on our final approach fix, we can see that our glide slope, or that magenta diamond, is approaching our altitude. Once it reaches that, our glide path and the autopilot standby is going to go to the active, and then the plane will start tracking that down. There we see it go to the active, so now the plane is going to start descending. We'll pull a little bit of power, and we just follow this glide path all the way down to the runway. For the Cessna, to get ready for landing, we can take flaps 10 below 110 knots. So we'll go ahead and take flaps 10 right now. See the flaps coming down, and we see our airspeed dropping a little bit, so we'll put in a little bit more power. Once we get down to about 500 feet or so, we'll take the rest of the flaps and we'll get ready for landing. And now we're coming up on 600 feet, so we'll pull a little power. We'll descend below 85 knots so we can take the rest of our flaps. There's 85, so we'll take flaps 20 and flaps 30. We'll slow down to the approach speed of the Cessna, which is 65 knots. And then, at this point, we just treat it like a normal landing. So we'll go ahead and we'll turn off autopilot. We'll keep the approach speed of 65 knots. Staying on glide path and centerline. We did our final landing check, so we have our mixture rich, our landing light on. And you just land. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching. As always, there are more videos to come. I do have a Discord set up, so if you want to see updates on up and coming videos or want to suggest videos for me to upload, go ahead over and check that out. There's a link in the description. There's also a link on the community page. Other than that, post any questions you have in the comments, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.